In this video, I'm going to talk about the progress that I have made in trying to recover from my second round of ill health, this time from myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, a condition that is, of course, very similar to long COVID. I've come an awful long way, but I still have a significant journey to go, and today I'm going to share with you exactly how I'm doing now. But first, if you are new to this channel, my name is Patrick Usher and I'm an ME-CFS patient, and I'm also someone who follows the research very closely. This is a place where I aim to offer simplified, accessible explanations of the research into ME-CFS and long COVID so that you can be more empowered in understanding these conditions. It's also a place where I talk about the various treatments that I myself have tried. If that sounds of interest to you, please like and subscribe. Now, for those who don't know me, this is the second time that I have had these kinds of chronic health problems. The first time was all the way back in 2014 to early 2015 when I had postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and at that point I recovered and was actually well for a good 3 years. Unfortunately, I then became ill again, and I've talked about that already in a video which is now linked above. But today I'm going to tell you about the progress that I have made. And in order to do that, let me tell you about how bad it was this second time around. So in the first couple of years of my illness, I was really rather limited. I was typically only able to do somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 steps per day. And when you are at that level of activity, you are essentially housebound. I was capable of on most days, doing a short little walk across the road to a grocery store or to the butcher, or maybe a short little walk down the street to sit on a bench looking out over a canal, or to go to a cafe that was very nearby. But that was essentially it. And there were also days where I was completely housebound. And of course, when you are at that level of activity, your baseline strength, in addition to all the factors in ME-CFS that cause exercise intolerance, is very low. And this means that very little can crash you and take you down. So back in those days, perhaps I might have walked slightly too quickly up the stairs, or even on some occasions changed direction too quickly, and that actually crashed me. And when I crashed at those times, the crashes would be longer than they are now. So they might have gone on for 3, 4, 5 days. And during those times, I would be mainly lying down. So this was a very difficult period, particularly when I was trying to live independently. It was a huge struggle, and ultimately it wasn't something that I was actually able for. It was also a time in which I was really trying to grapple with understanding the nature of ME-CFS. Even though I'd written a book about POTS, my knowledge about ME-CFS in particular wasn't great. And I had to really piece things together, reading a lot of research, a lot of summaries of research, and I was trying many different strategies to improve my condition. Now, although that was pretty bad, it then got a whole lot worse. From about mid-2020 until the end of January 2021, I actually descended into a period of complete hell, in which my symptoms were so severe that I often thought I was dying. And in fact, I was experiencing multiple life-threatening episodes throughout that period. It's not something that I like to think about very much, but I am going to do a video all about that period in my life before too long. And in the end, I was actually hospitalized. My experience in hospital was dire. I was not listened to, and my symptoms were psychologized. However, thankfully, I was later able to work out what was actually going on and reverse those symptoms myself. I'll leave that particular period of my life for now, but I will come back to it in a future video. So really, when we think of that point, I'm coming up from a very low base. For a couple of years then, from about autumn of 2021, I was able to walk more around between 4,500 and 6,000 steps per day. So I did get stronger. Now, of course, I could still crash, and during those times, I was still largely supine, but the symptoms were less severe. And during that period of time, even though there were some really awful episodes as well, in general, I was more functional. I could go for short walks, usually taking rests in the walks. I could go shopping, and I could engage in various creative projects. And I actually wrote a couple of books over that time, one of which is a pseudonym and a kind of funny book, but too controversial to mention. and the other was a medical hypothesis, which is available down below, all about the causes of excessive thirst in ME-CFS, POTS and long COVID. Over this time period as well, I also made various attempts to live independently because after my very low period back in 2020, the only real option for me was to move back in with my dad because I was not capable of living independently. I couldn't even hardly climb a set of stairs. So over the couple of years from late 2021 to late 2023, I made various efforts at independent living, usually in small French villages near my father, but also in larger cities like Toulouse. And these experiments were variable in their success rate. Sometimes they went pretty well. Other times they were a bit of a disaster and I had to come home. But nevertheless, I tried. Now, fast forward to now, which is the spring of 2024, and I would say that my level of functionality is up yet another notch. These days, I can walk between 7,000 and 8,000 steps, assuming it's a good day. This gives me a lot more functionality, and even on my bad days, I'm still usually able to manage things like cleaning and shopping. My bad days are significantly less intense, although occasionally, of course, things can still be very unpleasant. On most days now, I am able to engage in work for at least half the day, and even though cognitively I still stumble over words, and I hesitate to tell you how many edits I have to do on these videos because of the many brain farts that I have. One issue that I have had throughout the illness has been problems with symptoms at night, and these have improved significantly, but still sometimes it can be quite unpleasant and difficult to get to sleep. I'm not 100% sure why that is, but when I do overdo things, for whatever reason, the symptoms want to emerge at roughly 10 p.m. However, if I think back to the past, I used to have terrible nighttime symptoms much more regularly. And even though I always have a certain amount of fear about the nighttime in case I'm going to have a difficult episode, these are thankfully much rarer and usually much more manageable than before. So that's where I'm at now. I'm very encouraged and I hope that I can get up to 10,000 steps or more per day. There are, of course, ME-CFS patients who actually do have a decent level of conditioning despite the exercise intolerance that is characteristic of the illness. And what that means, if you can get to that sort of level, is that it takes a lot more to crash you and you have a lot more functionality for the days that are bad. And that is something that I am slowly aiming at achieving. Right now I am living independently and I am doing pretty well. Now I'm going to tell you briefly about the main things that I have found helpful in getting me this far. The first is brain retraining. Now of course this helped me a lot with my first attempt at recovering from chronic illness back in 2015. In fact, back then it had a miraculous effect and led to a full recovery from POTS. This time around, I have found brain retraining helpful in removing or softening the symptoms of autonomic dysfunction, such as the noise sensitivity, light sensitivity, excessive stress response, excessive adrenaline release, excessive kind of freeze response in the muscles. But while it helps with all of these kinds of things, I have not found it to help me as of yet removing post-exertional malaise or removing the exercise intolerance. So in general, my nervous system is actually fairly regulated, which is good, and I think that's helped me not become too ill, although I have also had other periods, and actually I forgot to mention that a few years back, after I'd been doing pretty well for about 6 months, I then suddenly descended into a 6-week period where I was only capable of walking 500 steps a day, so that was a particular low point I forgot to mention, and that was despite brain retraining. But I have found it helpful for what it can do, and it's something that I generally try to stick with, although I also have periods where perhaps it falls away for a few weeks or a few months, but usually I get back on the wagon of brain retraining before too long. In this case, they're kind of more techniques that I've developed myself rather than any particular program. The next thing that I have found helpful with improving my condition has been taking T3 thyroid hormone. I was pretty damn hypothyroid, in the sense that often happens to ME-CFS patients where you have a high reverse T3 and not enough T3 getting into the cells. My consultant is familiar with T3 treatment and he actually put me on T3 monotherapy. So that has been helpful in reducing symptoms of hypothyroidism, even though it's not really had an effect on exercise tolerance. Third thing I found really helpful, and this is the most helpful supplement I've ever taken for my condition is drinking oral rehydration solution, and I actually drink 2 litres of it every day. I use a product called Normalite, and it's highly effective at boosting blood volume. So a lot of people with ME-CFS and POTS have low blood volume. I did a whole video about why that develops, which is linked above right now, as well as a video about the ways in which I find drinking Normalite helpful, which is also linked above right now. But basically, this has a pretty profound effect on my symptoms and can even dramatically improve me when I'm in a crash. Fourth thing I found very helpful, or significantly helpful, is the buteyko method, which is a method that aims to increase carbon dioxide in the body. Now, it hasn't had a magical effect on me, but it does improve my general functioning. I feel more centered when I practice it. I feel warmer as my circulation improves, and I do believe that it has had a positive effect, when I'm practicing it at least, on my exercise tolerance. Fifth thing that I found really helpful was traveling to Germany to get HELP apheresis treatments. Now again, I've made a whole video about this, but if you're unfamiliar with HELP apheresis, it's a kind of blood washing procedure, conventional medical treatment, which removes microclots from the blood. And I had blood that was full of microclots. As you can see here from this picture, my blood was actually black because it was so full of microclots. But the treatment procedures actually removed these clots and restored a normal color to my blood. This treatment significantly improved my circulation, and I would say improved me overall around 20%, which 9 months after my last treatment, I would say that I have still maintained those improvements. And finally, I have found that very patient graded exercise can improve me. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean by this. Standardly, when people talk about graded exercise in a way in relation to ME-CFS, these are people who believe that deconditioning is the only problem, and they're also morons who want to ignore all the thousands of biomedical abnormalities that have been found in ME-CFS that show why the illness causes exercise intolerance and post-exertional malaise. So to be clear, if I was to do graded exercise in a standard way, where, for example, you just increase a minute every day, it would crash me. And that's happened many times. But what I have found is if I really lower my expectations for how much activity I might expand, if I really reduce my aims and aim for something that's very manageable, very sustainable, it's often been the case that I have been able to get stronger. I can still crash when doing this, but overall I would owe my improvement in functionality significantly to very, very patient increase in activity. When I say very patient, I mean perhaps increasing a daily walk by between 4 to 5 minutes a month. So this is a very, very slow increase. And rather than trying to increase, every day or every few days, it's more a question of getting to a certain level and staying there for some time, making sure it's okay, and then increasing 1 more minute. So that's been something that I found my body has been able to do for the most part. If I try and do it in a more standard way, or if I lose that discipline, I will usually crash. So those are the main things that have helped me get this far. I think that some things are holding me back, really recovering or getting to the next level of quality of life. I think there's 3 or 4 things potentially. The most relevant one is that I tested positive for 5 autoantibodies associated with ME-CFS. This essentially means that I have the full hit of autoimmune problems within ME-CFS, because really there are only 5 autoantibodies associated with ME. There are also ones associated with POTS, but I didn't really test positive for those. And these autoantibodies are affecting my blood vessel function, my heart function, my nervous system function. And when I think about what these autoantibodies do and I sense into my body, they pretty much explain why my body feels as it does. Now, I hope to do a lot of videos about these autoantibodies, about autoimmunity and ME-CFS, but really for me, I think that's my stumbling block. I would consider to return to Germany for immunoabsorption treatment or for the upcoming Berlin Cures treatment, which should be available next year. But I don't know either, because these treatments are very expensive and it would probably be the last roll of the dice in terms of expensive conventional treatments that I might try. And so I'm not sure when would be the right moment to attempt such treatments. And of course, they're always quite nerve-wracking, these sorts of blood washing procedures. Other things that I think are holding me back more minorly are spinal issues, the kind of things that Dr. Raymond Perrin has found, within ME-CFS patients, the rigidity in the thoracic spine down here, and the pain there that can then affect the circulation in the brain of fluids, blood, lymphatic system, the drainage of toxins. I'm currently working with an osteopath on improving that, and the early indications are that really this has definitely been a major problem for me. And then I think I have further ways to go with the brain retraining. I still have this tendency to develop a freeze response when I am faced with stressful tasks or situations. I think I know what's kind of going on there, and I am improving it, but it has some way to go before I can really fix that part of my brain through neuroplasticity. And finally, I wonder if full recovery is something that is open to me, because I also developed the skin laxity problem. So this is terribly embarrassing, but when your skin is like that, and this is very common among my kinds of illness. And even if you could recover from everything else, which I think is feasible, I've not yet come across a story of someone who's actually reversed this skin laxity problem. And people often say this is kind of permanent, this is Ehlers-Danlos, you got it for life. And when you have that skin laxity, it means that your blood vessels are not as supported as they could be, because the blood vessels, they like skin to be tight, and then they're supported, and that improves blood flow. So there may always be some element of exercise intolerance that I may have to deal with, but I do imagine that if you can remove everything else in these conditions, my life could still be very full. I'm just not 100% sure if I'm ever going to be granted, even if I do everything right, 100% health or recovery from all aspects of the health problems from which I currently have. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. So I keep going, and I've made a lot of progress. I hope that if you're in a situation right now where perhaps you're back where I kind of was at one point, 2,000 steps a day or less, to know that it is possible to improve. And I think that the thing is, especially if you've been ill for a while, dramatic improvements may not be the norm. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I think it's more likely that if you have been ill for some years, it's a question of slow improvements and aiming for the next improvement in your life, in your quality of life. It can be a real nightmare with these conditions, and the thing is to try and aim for a life where you're just reducing that nightmare a bit more, until your days, even if you are still chronically ill, are just something to look forward to, something where you can be engaging in projects or work that is of interest to you in a reasonable way, where you can see friends, where you can read a book, where you can watch movies and so on and so forth, and that you can start to develop and piece together a life that, even if it's not your ideal, it's something that when you wake up in the morning, you can look forward to more than you are dreading it. Okay, so that's the story of how I've been doing. This is where I'm at right now. I hope to do these videos again, maybe in another 2 or 3 months. I'll do another update to keep you in the loop as to how I'm going. Hopefully it will continue to be a generally upward trajectory, but you never know with these illnesses, because you can be going along, getting better, and then badumph, as may be familiar to some people watching this. Anyway, so look forward to engaging with you in the comments. Hope you found today's video helpful, and I'll see you next time.